Hello, welcome back. It's Tuesday. We're back on. Right, so as normal, and actually it's a little less drippy than it was last week, so we're winning. We're winning on the climate front. Yay. We are going to be talking for the next hour about that piece of software there, or we're going to be working in that piece of software, Capture One. So for those of you that have been on here for, when did we start this stuff? It was COVID. We've been doing this for 5 years. 5 years. So for those of you that have been here for the 5 years, well done. You've kept up. What is weird is I get to see you all sort of parading in at the beginning of the live. And what is weird, and I talked about it before, is you all see me, I don't see you. All I see is a little icon. So yeah, we have a weird one-sided relationship, but it's okay. I'm good with that. We're going to go through your images, not mine, for the next hour, and we're going to edit photos that you've sent in. So over the last week, some of you have sent in raw files with maybe some edits that you've done, with some questions, with some concerns, with some help me's, and we're going to try and cover as much of those as we can to get you the picture that you had in your mind when you click the button on your camera. So before we go into anything else, let's talk about what Capture One is. It is a raw processing piece of software. So that piece of software allows us to take the raw data that the sensor in the camera, the little square-shaped, colourful thing in the back of the back of the camera box, the data that receives through the lens, through in some cases the mirror and shutter and so on, but through the lens of what was in front of it, it records that as raw data, literal raw data, unprocessed. And Capture One allows us, as with other software, to take that data, process it a bit more in the same way that we can with our phones or with a JPEG or with a point and shoot camera or whatever else, to get it to what we remember, to what we saw, the color profile that we want it to feel like. So we talk about warmth of an image. That's about the quality of light. So golden hour feels very different to the middle of the day, which feels very different to the north hemisphere versus the equator. All of those things about quality of light, color, grading, tone, feel. That's the stuff that we can edit in raw processors, such as that one, Capture One. So if you don't know what Capture One is, go to capture1.com. It's written by some guys out in Copenhagen in Denmark. There's free trials online, so I think it's 30 days. There's no restrictions on it. You can use it to your heart's content. You can edit, you can save, you can export, all that stuff for free. And you can continue using it if you choose afterwards, but then you've got to pay. Bad news. And for those of you, as I say, that have been here for the whole long time, you will know we're going to cover the version and all the other stuff now. But first, I'm going to put this up so that it's actually recorded in history. An actual hairdresser said that, a barber said that. And he's been on here so long that he's no longer a barber. Well done, Paul. Paul gets a gold star. No one else does. Right, version of Capture One. So if you have successfully downloaded Capture One or you've been using it for a long time, like lots of you have, you should find that you are in a relatively recent version. You don't have to be on the latest. No one's forcing you to. But if you are and you want to be, it should read when you go to either Capture One About or Help About. It should say 16.6.3. There may be some other numbers after that are the technical version within, different numbers for Windows and Mac. But that's the version that's the latest one, and that's the version that we're going to be using today. If you do not have that version, it's okay. Just bear a couple of things in mind. So, number one, a lot of the tools that are introduced in Capture One are very genre specific. Sounded very European then, didn't it? Genre specific. Some tools are designed for wedding photographers, some are designed for landscape photographers, some are designed for commercial pack shot photographers. Whatever those tools are, you need to make the decision on what tools are important to you and which ones are worth upgrading to at a certain point in time. There is an underlying need to a certain extent to keep relatively modern with Capture One, which is based on two things. Number one, your operating system, and number two, your camera. So if you have a newer camera than the version of Capture One that you own or currently use, it is likely you're going to need to upgrade to be able to use that camera's files within Capture One, because obviously Capture One of today doesn't know the cameras that have been made in 2 years' time. So that's going to force you to keep up to date if you buy a new camera. And genuinely, I struggle with this, the mindset that we all have as photographers. When we buy a new camera, We accept that we will need new batteries. We accept that we may need new filters for our lenses. We accept we need new lenses in some cases, new memory cards, new straps, new screen protectors, all that stuff. And shock, we might need to pay some money to upgrade our software too. So when you are buying a new camera, don't rule out all the extra bits that you may have to consider as part of that purchase. It's not just the camera body, software being one of them. If, however, you do not need the tools and you're on a current operating system and your camera is supported in Capture One, why do you need to upgrade? You don't have to. There are some bug fixes in there for sure, but most of the tools that you're going to see us use today have been in Capture One for, I don't know, the last 3 or 4 major versions. AI tools are relatively new. They end up helping us infinite amounts when it comes to masking, but if you're happy with the old way of masking, you don't need to upgrade to that. Some of the retouching features for faces and stuff is fantastic. That's in the very latest version, the 16.6 version. But again, if you're never shooting faces, that sounded more brutal than it needed to, but if you're never photographing faces in your image, maybe you don't need that tool. So you make the decision. If you're on a subscription rather than a perpetual license, why wouldn't you always be in the latest version anyway? So just bear that in mind. Keep an eye on capture1.com, download it. That should be the version that you're on if you want, and if you have the ability to through subscription or through an upgrade. Okay, right, little bits of admin. To get your files across to this session, go there. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com, not Paul Reifer Live. You can call me that, but it's a bit weird because I've grown up being called Reefer for the whole of my life. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com, you will be invited to upload an EIP file or a RAW file from your camera. An EIP means that we get to see the changes that you've already made, and that's what most of the people on today's have done. Include your name, otherwise we will not include your picture, and let us know what it is that you want us to have a look at on here. And we can hopefully get through to it and we can edit it live, and we'll do that next week if you get it in time. In between each of these lives, go to there if you're not against the big meta place. I know some people have moral issues. So if you aren't one of those people and you are on Facebook, go to that group. You will find people in there asking questions, answering questions. You'll also find monthly competition in there, which is becoming quite coveted, I have to say. And in between all of that stuff, if you want to learn more stuff, you can download those as well. So there's links down below. You can go do that. And those are 1.5 hour sort of in-depth sessions into individual topics. Cool. So let's go into Capture One. A tree. A tree. So this is from Robert. Robert's online, I think. In answer to Gary's question, is it still hot in England? Depends on which area of England you are, but in my area, permanently, yeah. So yeah, hot because we don't have cooling means. It's a different thing to being hot. I've been colder in Death Valley. Anyway, so Robert's picture of a tree, and this is the edit that Robert sent in, and the question was, is it too much? Let's go through a thought process. So one thing I want to make clear before we go much further, when we're looking at these pictures that you guys send in, I haven't spent days, even hours, even actually more than a few minutes going through them. We don't pull them apart. We don't deconstruct them. What you're seeing on the screen is me going through it as if I've seen it just now, which is most likely the case. But what I'm looking for is, does this feel like a finished image? And quite often I'll go back to the original one just to see what the differences are, but only after I've just appraised it and think, does this look like a finished image? So the things for me that I'm looking for on here, number one, this isn't quite level. Now that may be natural, it may naturally not be level, and it probably is the case knowing fields. If I put a guide up, so if you don't have guides on your toolbar, go to right click on your toolbar, go to customize toolbar, drag this guides one up there, and you'll have this little icon, and then we've got some draggable. If I go back to my move tool, so either click the little arrow or press V on the keyboard, and I can move them up and down or left and right. If I want another guide, go to view, customize guides, and I can add, let's say, another vertical guide. Same to delete. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to pull this down, and I'm going to verify, because I might be going crazy, that this is in fact not a level ground. Now, that's okay, but I'm looking at this, and quite often when I'm looking at images on here, the position that I'm coming from is maybe different to the position that the photographer came from, because I'm looking at, does this work as a print? And that's what 99% of my decisions are made on. They're not necessarily made on, does this match what I saw at the time? They can't be, because I wasn't there. We can help with that if I get an idea of what it looked like at the time, and you can explain it. But the reality is, for most of the stuff that we produce, it goes to print. And in print, you don't necessarily have the luxury of the viewer knowing where you were, how it felt, how warm it was, how cold it was, how empty it was, how busy it was, whatever those attributes of that scene were, unless you either describe it in text or genuinely show them through the picture. So when we talk about telling stories through a picture, we don't mean a series, well, you can do, but we don't mean you need a comic strip. What we mean is, I should be able to look at that picture and get a feel for what's going on, or how it feels, or what was happening. And to me, this is such a bold subject. Solo tree in the middle. Funnily enough, I have a very similar print that we produce called the Faraway Tree. And it is, so in theory, we're breaking all the rules. It's in the middle of the frame, middle. I had a German guy have a go at me once calling it mitty. Bad. The reality is, I like it in the middle because it's a bold, iconic solo subject, and that works. But if it's going to be bold, iconic, and solo, it's got to be those three things: bold, iconic, solo. And what that means is, I can't really have any distracting features away from this as a subject. And to me, having this ground lean down distracts a little bit, because it's one of the things that I see and second guess then the rest of it. The background, not too worried about. We've got some challenges here in terms of how this tree feels versus these here, and we'll come into that. But I'm sort of in a place of, I want to fix this. And the first thing I'm going to do, so having looked at that and thought, right, what are the things that I need to consider? I'm going to go back to the original. The temptation is to do a before and after. So press the Y key on your keyboard, or up here, before and after. And I can see before and after. But there's two things that are an issue with before and after. Number one, it's showing me the cropped, to a certain extent graded, because it's applying the ICC profile as well, image, and then my adjustments. Okay, so cropped base characteristics done, my adjustments. And what I mean by base characteristics, if I go into our color tab, this is using a Fuji camera, so it's picked up whatever color profile was on there. But I'm viewing what Capture One has already processed to a certain extent, not the raw content. So it's already pre-processed to a little bit, and I'm seeing the crop version. If I want to see the whole original image, right click, new variant, you can see that there, and you will get exactly that, a new variant. Now what a new variant is this same image with no changes whatsoever. It still had that initial curve applied by Capture One, so it's still not completely raw, but if I go before and after, you'll see there are no changes between them. Great. And then I start looking at, right, how does this feel here versus how does it feel here? And the answer is very, very, very different. And that's where I struggle here, because I don't know whether the intention with this shot was to show the lead up, so this foreground being out of focus, and then all the way up to the tree, which grows in sharpness until you actually get to the branches. That's really nice. Or whether this was because, I don't know, maybe Roger gave up walking. Who knows? Robert gave up walking. But it may be that we don't want this foreground subject, and I don't know that because I wasn't there. So in this particular image, we're probably going to edit two different versions of it and see which one works. Let's go with the solo one first, and then we'll come back to this one. In answer to Keith's question, by leveling the main character tree might put the background trees at a funny angle. What's the worst of two potential images? Well, it depends how we do it. So regular viewers will recognize there are two ways that we straighten things in Capture One. One of the ways is the correct way, straightening tool. So we've got a rotation tool up here. I've got the straighten tool here, and the straighten tool allows me to draw a straight line of what I think should be straight. Great. Now, to Keith's point. In theory, whether the eye would notice, but in theory, these trees in the background are now leaning. Okay, so yes, we've leveled the field, but in theory, those trees are now pulling over as well. Prasad, gold star for regular viewing. We have another tool in Capture One, which is Keystone. So I'm going to just clone this variant. So cloning being to copy across the actual changes that were made and reapply them to another version. I've just quickly color tabbed or color labeled those using the minus key and the plus key on the keyboard. Minus in red so that I know these are the ones that I'm working on, and green was with a plus sign so that I know that's the original. Don't touch that because we can always go back then to Robert's image. So on this one, which is a copy of Robert's image, instead of using the straighten tool, we're going to use the keystone tool. Because the keystone tool, and specifically in this case the horizontal keystone tool, allows me to keep the top the same, but effectively stretch the bottom. And what I'm doing it a little bit by eye, but I'm just matching this distance from here to there with this distance here to there. That's a bit too much, actually. I'm going to go to about there. And what that does, we'll come back to this in a second, but if I go to my guides, I now have a straight field. But what I haven't done is rotate the whole image. I've stretched it. I've pulled it. And if I go to the crop, you can actually see what it's done. You see this trapezoid shape. So it's warped the image. It's left the top exactly how it was, pretty much. It hasn't messed around with it too much. It's not twisted things. It's not rotated things. What it's done is it's pulled, and you can see it down here. It's pulled this bottom left bit so that we're pulling the ground down without having quite so much rotation on the top. Now, the problem is, as you saw just then, it's stretched our tree. It's got a bit wider. Well, in the Keystone tool, under our sliders here, so you'll find Keystone under Lens, you've got something in here called Aspect. An aspect allows us to squish or stretch an image. So here's a fun one. For those people that shoot with anamorphic lenses, you use Aspect to be able to fix that. But in this case here, I'm going to do it by eye, but let's just go maybe a 9.2, something like that. Let's have a look. That's the rotate one. That's ours. In fact, we squished it a bit too much. Let's go to maybe 7. Okay. Now you see when I do this and I go from rotate to keystone, it's almost like 3D, right? We're sort of twisting around the tree. But you see that these have different effects, slightly different. Doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It's your call how to do this. But this is a rotation. This rotates everything on the canvas evenly. So everything has been twisted by 2 degrees, pretty much. This is a keystone. At most, it's been rotated by 1.7, but the other bits up here have been anchored and not twisted by so much. So it has less impact on the areas that we don't want to impact, and more of an accelerated impact on the areas that we do. So, interesting question from Anthony. Is there a way to overlay the original edited image pre-Keystone over the Keystone image of Capture One? There isn't, to my knowledge. Sorry, that's not true. There is. It's a very messy way, but we could actually use the overlay feature in the tether panel. But to be honest, that's going to be really confusing. But what you do, if you really wanted to do this, I would take this out as a PNG. I would set it to 50% opacity. I would import it into my overlay tool, which is in here. And in theory, I could then overlay that image. Oh, it gets very messy. But I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't think that's you're going to end up tied up in knots. I think we should chill out about that. Yes, it's possible to, but using that overlay tool, but It's not really what it's designed for. It's designed for like magazine layouts and stuff like that. But yes, you could get it as an image that you could then overlay over the top, and then you could match to where you're trying to get it. But in landscape terms, generally speaking, as long as we're sticking to within the reality of nature, we're not too worried about it. It's got to work for you. So these are the two different versions, but both of them, to me, feel cleaner, weird way of saying it, than the slanted one. So to me, that already feels more iconic. That already also feels pretty decent. I'm going to go with the Keystone one just because I want to. No other reason than that. And I'm just going to increase our crop a little bit, give these trees a little bit of space on the side of them. And we get to there. Okay. So then I'm looking at the content down here. And let's look at again, before and after. This feels very soft, right? This feels very harsh, very high contrast. So now I'm going to go into the layers and our histogram. Now, our histogram here is what I'd expect. Nothing more majorly clipped, nothing overexposed, nothing really underexposed. It's all sort of sat here in the upper midtones. And if I look at these layers one by one, so let's turn off the grass layer. So this has lifted it and lightened it a bit, right? Then we've got deep sky. Great brush. What's it done? Well, there's a very soft mask that's been brushed in over here. Okay. The sky mask. Some of you are going to guess where I'm already going to go with that mask, because that was a little preview for where we're going to head in a second. The tree mask. Okay, so the tree mask, we've got a little bit of brightness lifting, lifting black by 100%. That's an interesting one. But yeah, I get it. It's pulled back all of the shadow information. Then nothing on our main image. Oh, there's a curve on the main image layer. Ooh, interesting curve. Okay. Oh, I like that. So let's interpret what this curve does. If I turn this off, very flat. Turn it on, we've got our contrast back. The way that that's been done is by forcing anything which is 202, see on the input bit down here, or brighter, to instantly go to 255. In other words, pull the histogram up this way to become brighter at the top end. Lift all of our highlights up, lift our midtones up. When we get into our lower midtones, leave them as they were, and then shadows crush them. And what you get is this effect. So it's gone from there, pretty flat, to there. Now the problem is I don't actually think that was what was started, because if I remove these layers, okay, this is where it starts. This is I guess, step one that Robert's done. So it started there. Quite a bit of detail. You can see all the detail in the tree here. We can see, it's soft in the grass and all that sort of stuff. The addition of this curve makes this really, really harsh. And to me, that's a risk, because what I'm then seeing is we've got a layer here that says tree. Now the tree layer lifts all those levels up. So it's undoing what was done in the main image layer. But more importantly, it's doing this black lift here of 100%. So if I look at the tree here, I've got a layer that's crushing it, and I've got a layer that's recovering it. If I go to before and after, actually the detail on the tree, it's more clarified for sure. But in fact, that's probably, yeah, there's a clarity addition in here as well. But we've almost ended up in the same place, right? Tonality-wise. So, we're at mid-tony here, yeah. I think the irony is we didn't need the luma curve in the image, because you've undone it with the tree layer. And I'm going to guess if I go to the sky layer, we've got recovery of highlights. So the base image layer lifted all those highlights, made them really, really bright compared to what they were. And we've got a new layer on the sky to pull them down. And then same with the whites. We're sort of countering this. So the whites have been pulled up, highlights have been pulled down. This is a very weird way of getting to a relatively neutral position, which is kind of where I'm seeing on this. Grass, well, this becomes, It's a tone thing. I get it. It just becomes very different. So highlights have been lifted in the grass. We've got a custom white balance on there. Is that any different? Yes, so it's warmer than the base image layer. So it's got more yellow, more golden. Is there anything in our color editor? Nothing there, nothing in advanced, nothing in skin tone. So it's only really this tool and the brightness tool that's doing any heavy lifting on the grass. And if I were to undo that and undo our white balance, yeah, we can see where it comes from. But again, it just feels like it may not be as necessary if we didn't do it in the first place. And the do it in the first place bit, what I'm referring to, is this pretty impressive, but maybe unnecessary curve. So let me just experiment with something. If I'm not going to do this from scratch, but if I were to pull down our tree layer, we'll talk about the layer in a second, to 50%, our sky layer to 50%, deep sky down a bit, grass down a bit, and then go to my image layer and don't crush these shadows. And don't pull these highlights so much. And instead, if I were to go on a bit more subtle of a S curve, so I get to a similar place, but without needing all of those pretty punchy adjustments. I'm just going to pull that black back up there. So this is the version that Robert has. This is the version with 50% of it all undone. In fact, more than 50% because I've pretty much undone that layer as well, or the curve as well. But we go from there, which feels very crispy, very crunchy. You see here, this becomes really, really, really quite harsh. Whereas here, we've kept some of the cloud detail. It just feels a little more subtle, a little more natural. This just feels very digital. This feels a little more organic, I think is the better way of describing it. So I get to a place of, if you don't need to use the tool, don't. If you're having to use lots of tools to recover back to where you started, I would question whether you've done something to mean that you've made it more difficult than the original was. And in this case, I think that initial curve is probably causing more issues. And as a result, it feels more processed. This feels overly processed compared to here. Craig, original raw looks hazy. Use the dehaze instead of the contrast curve to start. Potentially, yes. So we have obviously in our tool bag, we've got the dehaze tool here. I could lift that up. It is going to make things go more rich, which you might like. But then I'm also in the place of I've then got to pull all this stuff back. The other problem as well I've got with this is the haze is helping separate our foreground from our background. These trees here are less important than this tree here. So that haze is actually helping with it a little bit. Almost, do you add some haze? No, you don't. That's going to go very wrong. So no. Now, there was one thing, though, that I said some of you will spot and some of you have not. Look at my mask. I'm unimpressed with this mask, Robert. We need to do some work on this. I think this is possibly an AI mask, or either that or it's a magic brush mask. I would be in a place of wanting to tidy this up a little bit. You know, if it's a sky mask, why am I selecting trees? If it's a tree mask, why have I got bits of sky as well in between the leaves and stuff like that? The tree mask, ironically, is just probably a bit more consistent. But let me just add that. And we've done this quite often, so I've just now obliterated that mask. But what I can now do is go into a magic eraser, not an AI eraser, a magic eraser. The magic eraser, say sample entire photo, really low tolerance, and click on a color of the sky. And it will clear it down, but it's going to leave our trees and our foliage. And if I don't like what it's done, let's just have a look in here. Is this leaves or is it sky? No, it's leaves. It's got the leaves. Okay. So when I'm happy with that, even this bit back here is actually a tree. I then go to refine mask and I can get it a bit cleaner too. Okay. Pascal, oh sorry, Pascal, Prasad, issue potentially with the Luma tool, because I would agree you could use the Luma tool here. The problem is if I look at the luminosity of this tree here is 192, this background here 200, this over here 205, this tree in here, we're at 177, let's go to here, 183, 198, this bit of sky 204, this bit back here 195. So it's all around about the same sort of area, and if I'm using the Luma range to cut an exact point, it looks again very digital, very binary. I would rather use the refine mask tool just to get us to that. And in fact, if we don't like that, we can refine it even more. You know, we can get really quite detailed masks with refine. But that then keeps those alterations that we made on that layer onto the trees. The sky, well, let's make it the sky, right? So let's go to our mask. Let's try a magic eraser. Issue with the magic eraser is it's going to think that, oh no, okay. Because of that similarity in tone, I thought it might pick up some of the sky as well. It didn't. Good. I am going to include these clouds. So we're going to go to a traditional, sorry, not clouds. They are the background trees, be clear. But they are effectively sky artistically. And look in here, see, this sort of stuff annoys me because we never quite get it. So I'm going to just go to a magic brush. Don't tick in entire photo. In fact, we are going to need to maybe. Well, actually, no, we don't. Because when we refine this mask, it will rather helpfully blend for me. To go to grayscale mask, option and M, or up here, display grayscale mask, same thing. Refine that mask a bit more. There we go, and it starts filling in the gaps, which is quite nice. So now I've got two masks that are better aligned to what was really there, the tree versus not tree, or sky if you want to call it that, and then the lead up. I would say this feels like a natural picture of a tree. If I wanted to really pump it, I can go to my layers, create a filled layer. Let's go into our levels. Turn on my exposure warning first to make sure that I'm not doing anything silly because it will give me a red warning. Let's go to there and go to there. Maybe not that much, maybe just a little. Good. Now when I print, I'm always looking to try and make it a little brighter, a little on the brighter side when we go to print, because print tends to appear darker than on screen. That to me feels, and it's purely feeling, a bit cleaner, a bit more natural, a bit more organic than this one, which just feels a little heavy on the contrast. If I compare these two, you know, let's go side by side. So this is the one I've just produced. This is the one originally from Robert, and specifically, let's look in here. So you see, I've got this, I've got that. It's a competition now, but I've got bark. Robert doesn't. And the reason is because of all that crushing of levels and contrast and shadows and all that sort of stuff. So if you look at these two, even though from a distance they may look similar, when you print this, they're going to look very different. This one is going to look crushed, like detail is missing. With this approach, you get a much more organic feeling to it. It's just going to look nicer up close. So that's number one. Let's call it that. Now I've created a problem or a rod for my own back with this because I want to keep these adjustments, but I want to change the crop. And I'm aware that all the layers I've just produced will end at the end of where I had on screen. But let's give it a go. So I'm creating a new variant and I'm going to make it yellow by pressing the star or the asterisk key on the keyboard. So this carries on every bit of adjustment that I had in this one to here. And to Robert's point, where are we there? Real question is, how much of the foreground should I crop? And that was where we got to when I sort of loaded up this picture in the first place. So let's go to our crop. At the moment it's unconstrained, but it's, what is we at? 26.79 by 19.93. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe 3x4, 4x5, something like that. Let's go 3x4. And I'm going to switch that and just squeeze the crop across to make it portrait. Because I believe some of what Robert was trying to capture was this lead up. And again, you're going to get angry continental people, let's call them that, saying this is wrong because it's in the middle and we don't put things in the middle. Everything should be on a 1/3 line. It is gospel. We must stick to it. And it's the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard. If the image works for you visually, then knock yourself out. Do whatever you like with your crop, with your positioning. And I would actually be in a place of this feeling quite nice. Yeah, in theory, it's middle, but I don't mind it. And it gives me that lead up. Now, the thing to check with this is because we've done a recrop since then, the wide part or the width part I'm not worried about because the stuff that's over here and the stuff that's over here was in my mask. It's the foreground. So if I go to my grass, I want to make sure that was in the mask. Now, luckily, this one, I'm guessing, was probably a gradient mask. Let's just check. Yeah. So it's a gradient mask, which is actually slightly off now because of our rotation. So I'm just going to fix that. That's probably off in this one as well. Not so much, but let's just make sure it lines up properly. Okay. So actually we got away with it, which is great. Now, if we're going to do a lead up, I want to feel like we're sort of, I don't know, poking around, having a look around, discovered it, it's come out of some darkness or something like that. So we're going to undo all the money you've spent on having lovely lenses with no vignetting, and we're just going to soften that in there. I might want to brighten up the whole scene. Note that it didn't matter what layer I was on then to do the vignette. The vignette is a global setting regardless of layer, but do keep an eye on what layer you're on. For instance, now the filled layer, I'm just going to lift up brightness a touch. And it actually allows me then to pull in a bit more vignettes, so almost a one-stop vignette. Yeah, it's pretty good. And I like that. It's a personal thing, but I personally quite enjoy the idea that you've got a lead up, and the fact that this was shot out of focus, I'm presuming intentionally used that, because this we kind of lose it. Yeah, it's it is out of focus in the foreground. There is a little bit of a lead up. It is quite a strong image, but it is a bit messy with the stuff that's in the background here. I'm not sure what is in the back here, whether that's still forest up there or something like that. It's strong, but I think this is probably more interesting if you were to hang it on a wall, personally. Roger, would you clone out the 3 yellow bokeh blobs in the foreground? I'm guessing you mean things like this one, and this one. Genuinely artistic discussion rather than a technical one. So if you want to, healing brush tool up here, change the size of it. You can choose for Capture One to select where you want it to come from. I recommend people don't do that. Go old school. Hold down the Option key or the Alt key. Click where you want to take the source and paint it. Capture One will do the same thing. It's still going to merge it in and blend it in, but it's not going to do it wrong, as people say. The other blobs, I'm guessing we mean, it's like whack-a-mole, isn't it? So I'm guessing you mean this one. Q on the keyboard will get you to your healing brush tool. Again, I'm going to select a different source point. I'm going to take this one here, and I'm going to paint there. Worried about clipping that bit, but that's done a pretty good job. Okay. And do we see a third one? Someone give me a hand. Anyway, that's how to do it. You can knock them all out if you want, but it's the funny thing. We pay a lot for a lens with some nice bokeh, a nice little out of focus ring. Is it worth taking them out? I don't know. I think actually they almost add a little bit of interest in there because it's the little sparkles of light, this little specular highlight that the grass has picked up from the sun. I kind of like them. But so going back to the initial point, so here is our shot, the original one. Do you now see how different this feels? Not just for the slant. That bit is a Keystone thing. Really easy to do. But to me, this feels more natural. It's subtle, but it is actually a big difference. And this, if you want to go for, a sort of hideaway or peekaboo look, or as Jim says, the whack-a-mole look, because we're on that page now, I would be tempted to go with the portrait version. I just like that, I think. And if I go to my crop, I'm limited. I can't really go further down. I can't really go further up. So that would be the right aspect ratio, the 4:3. Yeah, I would go with that. But there you go. So those are the two edits compared with this one here. And you see them when they're side by side. They do feel different. The one on the left, which is the one we've just edited, just feels a bit more, or a bit less binary, a bit less digital, because it hasn't had all those peaks added in, you know, hard contrast in the brights, hard contrast in the darks. Thomas, when you select the starting point for the hill, isn't that cloning automatically? No. So if let's create another, in fact, let's do it on here. So I've got two versions of the clone tool. They're the same tool, but just two ways of working with it. So let's imagine I want to get rid of this stone, lump, dog, whatever it is. So I make a brush relatively small. If I do nothing with the clone tool and just paint over here, Capture One now decides where to take it from. Now, couldn't have planned that better. Here's a perfect example of what goes wrong. So Capture One has said, out of this image, I have decided that the bit that's most useful to us to blend in is from down here. Well, this bit's out of focus. This bit's not. So that's no good to me. Now, with the automatic version, I can always pick this up and take it from somewhere else, of course. But sometimes it'll even choose one outside of the crop, so you can't always get to it. I would recommend, even though now the new healing brush tool, the newer healing brush tool is very good, it is always worth still Option key or Alt key, choosing where you want to take it from and painting, because now I control which part of the image it's coming from, whether it's in focus, whether it's out of focus, and how well it blends. That's all. So it's not a case of you can't use the automatic version. It's that the automatic version sometimes doesn't get it right. That's where we're at. Okay, Jed's image. Oh, fun one. Bit of a history lesson. Not from this, because this isn't old enough, I'm guessing. But in general. So Jed's question was basically around straightening these pillars. If you look up at an image, or it's an image, an object, and you have a wide lens especially, but if you are not on the midpoint of that object, if you're either looking up or looking down, the lines are going to diverge or converge, which is called perspective distortion, which is why when we look down from a rooftop, everything looks like it's getting closer together as it gets further and further away from us. That's distortion, and that's what you get with these buildings. But here's the problem. So Jed has tried two different ways of doing these pillars to get them level. The first was in Capture One. And here's the fun one, right? Guides. So I'm going to turn those guides on just like I had before. This pillar here in the middle is roughly straight. Yep, good. Okay. This wall here, pretty much straight. I'm guessing this was done with Keystone. Let's have a look at the crop tool. Yep, so it's big Keystone. You can see how much it's pulled from the shape of the triangle. Big Keystone. This pillar over here, the edge of this pillar, look at that. That's nice and straight. The edge of this pillar, oh, what's going on there? How can this bit be straight, this bit be straight, but that bit not be straight? There's a weird one, isn't it? This wall here is straight. This wall here is straight. This pillar here on the outside is not straight. This pillar here on the inside is straight. What's going on? Who's been to the Taj Mahal? I swear this is on topic. If you look at a picture of the Taj Mahal, it's actually a very, very, very clever piece of engineering. The pillars that are around the outside of the mausoleum, there's 4 of them, one in each corner, are not straight intentionally. They lean out, in fact, and they lean out for 2 reasons. The first was, in the case of an earthquake or the case of catastrophe, they would fall away from the mausoleum and not damage the main building. Clever. The second is that visually it meant that when you looked at the Taj Mahal, the columns looked straight, even though there is perspective distortion. Even though I'm looking up at them, if I look straight down that sort of fountain along the courtyard, the pillars at the edges, because that's how our brains are designed to look at sort of edges of things, the pillars at the edges look straight. If you actually look on the inside of the pillars, they're leaning slightly. Now, There's a second thing as well that is also done by architects for two different reasons. Again, lots of different reasons. Number one, you make columns smaller at the top than they are at the bottom because the column at the top is bearing less weight than the column at the bottom, and it saves on materials. So in other words, this is quite a lesson, isn't it? But you get this when you shoot lots of architecture. So in other words, this bit of the pillar down here has to support the weight of this roof and a load of other stuff and the weight of all of this concrete. Whereas this bit here doesn't have all the weight of all this concrete. It's just supporting that bit of the roof and pushing down. So this bit doesn't need to be as strong, in theory, as this bit, which means this bit can be smaller than this bit, which means this bit uses less materials, which saves money. But also, visually, if I make this bit smaller in diameter than this bit, the building looks taller than it really is, because we judge the height of things by perspective distortion. So when we look at something and it gets narrower and narrower, the further it goes away from us, wow, that must be really, really, really tall. Think of the Burj Khalifa. So obviously it's structural as well. You don't have a straight building going all the way up. But one of the ways that optically the Burj Khalifa looks so tall is because it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as it goes up. Some of it is natural perspective distortion, but some of it is by design. So here's the problem. Trying to straighten these pillars, and this was done in Capture One with Keystone, this was done in Photoshop. The short answer, Jed, unfortunately, is you're not going to be able to. Let me give you an example, because I played with this as well in Photoshop. Here is our pillar. And I have straightened this. So the way that I know that it's straightened, I've actually linked the middle of this pillar all the way down, all the way through. If there is still some perspective distortion on this for sure, don't get me wrong. But if I were to completely even this up, so let's make the pillar, the column, all the way up the correct width, correct or same width. That's what we get. And that doesn't help us much. I mean, it's kind of cool. I kind of like that building. I wish they'd done it like that because it looks kind of fun. But photographically, it doesn't help us. Visually, it doesn't help us. Optically, it doesn't help us. In perspective, it doesn't help us. If you want to straighten this pillar, and the same would happen if I apply it to the right-hand pillar, you get the same thing. You get a fall off to the left. And it's because these pillars are unfortunately not straight. So in Capture One, trying to use this as Keystone to try and straighten them, it's going to look awkward. How do you fix that? There's a reason that a lot of architectural photographers carry big ladders, because the way that you shoot this, if you do not want any perspective distortion, is either to use a tilt shift lens. So you put the lens not looking up, you have it looking flat on, and you shift the sensor separate from the lens. And that gives you a lovely lack of perspective distortion, but there's a limit to how far you can push it based on the image circle. The second is you position yourself halfway up the building. You still get some distortion, you get barrel distortion more than anything, because the bottom and the top will curve away from each other. You know, your lens is a sphere. But it's a way of getting a more accurate, correct, in quotes, geometry for anything that is vertical. So if this had been shot around this height here, you need a big ladder, I get it. There's a tree here, climb it, you know. But if you'd shot it at the middle, your pillars would be still leaning in, because they are. These pillars are actually getting thinner as they go up, which really doesn't help. But everything else would be straight. Everything else, every other vertical line would be straight, and the pillars would actually show you, you'd actually see a picture of the pillars, despite the building being completely straight, the pillars actually getting thinner as they go up, and that's the difference. When we talk about architectural photography, this is the stuff that people focus on, because this is the really difficult bit of architectural photography, is getting something to look architecturally accurate and pleasing to the eye. Charles, so are there any must-have plugins that you recommend? DxO Pure Raw. So funnily enough, DxO make a plugin called, I think, Viewpoint, from the top of my head. We've tried it. It does great stuff, but it's still not going to fix this image. You know, there's lots of stuff that's out there, but just bear in mind with architecture, sometimes you're going to be scuppered by the architect. The rest of the edit on here, there's a lot of golden light been brought in, so it's been warmed up. If I go to my exposure warning, I've got quite a lot here that's oversaturated. So you'll see it doesn't mean it's overexposed, literally. So this here, I've still got some color in there, that's blue. This here, I've still got color in there, that's yellow. But what it does mean that one or more channels, in this case the blue channel, and in this case the red channel, have got too much data in the highlights. It's to push too far, and it's this spike that gives it away. If I were to go back to my before shot, I still have some exposure warning in there, but actually the edits have made it worse. So I would personally be in a place of considering switching this curve from being automatic. Turn off our before and after. Let's go to, I've just cloned that, so let's make that a working one. From automatic to being linear response. Look at the difference. So linear response isn't always the answer, but if I look at here and here side by side, the only difference, when I talked earlier about Capture One, when it brings something in, it already applies a curve, which in this case is the automatic, or it's actually film standard. It's the same thing. When it's done that, it's pushed the highlights and it's pulled the shadows. If you have something that's close to clipping the highlights in your original raw file, Capture One's going to push it even more. Linear response, this one, is a lot kinder, a lot more subtle. It loses lots of contrast, which is a bad thing in some ways, but it also protects your highlights and your shadows from being pushed too far. So in this case here, I would be tempted to use that curve and go to a global layer, which Jed has made. So one layer that has a mask everywhere. And instead of using exposure, because exposure is going to tip things over, we use a mixture of brightness, which doesn't tip it to the same extent. And we might want to lift the mid-tones up on the luma range, protect the highlights. You see me pulling the highlights back down. Pull the mid-tones, drop the shadows a bit. So I get, it's not the same. Don't get me wrong. If you just turn off the exposure warning. So this is with the auto curve. This is linear response. Yes, it is duller. Yes, it is less contrasty. But my God, look at the difference in detail. Look up here. Between these two images, I've lost it here. I've got it here. This has got tone, it's got color, it's got texture. This has started to blow. Sorry. So, again, if you see huge contrast shifts and huge problems like that, consider using the linear response curve. You don't have to. It's not better than film standard. It's not one versus the other, but it depends on the scenario. In this scenario, I would, because you're seeing that, and it's a good reminder. Even at the end of your edit, always turn on the exposure warning. Just make sure you haven't clipped anything. Okay, speaking of perspective, Georg. I wanted to touch on this one today because this is round the corner. I'm live broadcasting to you from right there. There you go, little insight. I'm there right now. How cool is that? Actually, I'm there 5 seconds ago because of the delay that you got. But Georg's got this shot, and he was trying to hide the people by using foreground, and this works in a way, but it doesn't work in another. Out of focus foreground is great as a lead up, but you need a lot of it. You need some volume of it. If I take the image from Robert, here is an example of using an out of focus foreground to lead into an image. But you see how much we're using of it. And in here, I've only got basically this one plant that is out of focus. The other bits of the foreground, so this, sorry, that's wrong. This is out of focus. But look, this bit's here are in focus. This bit's not. It's not enough to make it look intentional. If anything, it looks accidental, and that's a shame. So I would almost have been in the place, Georg, of getting up higher. Yes, there are people on the beach down below, I know. You can heal them out. Yeah. The place, Paula, is Durdledore. Georg called it Dumbledore. It's not Dumbledore. Where are we there? I got very confused here, but it's Durdledore. It's part of the Lulworth estate in Dorset. This is a UNESCO World Heritage. Well, in fact, the whole of this bay is, the whole area is. It's a really nice subject, but in the summer it gets rammed. Otherwise, it's a reasonable recovery. There's a deep sky brush, I'm guessing. Yeah, on there. Could have called that from the sky. You know, it's lifted. It doesn't look too overdone. It pops. You know, great. But I would just be careful of, if you're going to do this, do it with intent. Don't do it so it looks accidental. Going back to Keystone. So our challenges here. Um, this is where, and you've got to be careful with this stuff. So the edit. Let's just talk about the edit itself. Shadows have been recovered. Highlights have been recovered. We've got some detail back in this building here. You know, we've got our Georg's a big fan of the deep sky brush, I know. So we've got a not sky layer. This mask is much better than the one last week, Georg. Deep sky brush in the sky, yes. Healing brush to fix the spot out there. That's fine. So overall, you know, a pretty simple set of layers that do what they say on the tin. I would say this building looks a little too processed. Doesn't quite pull it off as natural compared to there, simply because it's just been, you know, it's been pulled too much. Where are we? Yeah, the shadow's been lifted too much. The blacks is a big giveaway. It tends to make things look a little bit false, unfortunately. So, you know, pulling that back a little bit might help. You've got some room in there to do a little bit more clarity if you want to, but you know, you get there. That's fine. The deep sky brush is what it says in the tin. It's the brush that's built into Capture One by Capture One. So if you go to the style brushes, under built-in style brushes, under enhancements, you will find these. Really useful, actually. People don't use these enough, or they forget that they've got them. So you've got in there color, which is cooling, warming, and saturation. You've got the standard sort of dodge and burn stuff in light and contrast. You've got add haze and remove haze. So we use the dehaze function to do it. There's a brush built in to add and remove haze if you want to add a bit of fog for atmosphere. But under enhancements, you've got these, which are really useful. The whiten teeth one, great for people. The soft flare, just if you've got a sun or something that's got that sort of crusty area because it's just breaking through a cloud, add a bit of soft flare. Red skin reduction on humans works great. Iris enhance works on humans. Obviously, you've now got the retouch panel up here, which is quite nice for skin, and then you've obviously got the masks themselves. So if I go to my people masks, I can separate out all of these. But the style brushes do a good job, and Deep Sky does this great job of combining a load of little tools and adjustments to give us a sky that goes from there to there. It just gets richer, moodier. Be careful if you've got cloud, it's going to make it look angrier, a bit more stormy, but it gives us a depth. It almost polarizes the sky. It's the best way to suggest or how to think about it. But it just feels stretched. It just feels weird. And I'm looking at this building here, the HSBC building. If I go to an original of this, while it's not great in terms of its perspective, let me just switch this to be a landscape crop so we can just see the buildings a bit clearer. So just for the sake of screen, this building is warped. It's a 10mm lens, so this is a real, they call it fisheye lens, effectively. It is pulling stuff, so the further stuff gets to the edge of the frame, the bigger it becomes. And look at this. There isn't, no, we all know, let's be honest, this window is the same size as this window, but wow, it isn't. And that's the lens doing that. It's pulling it, and you're not able necessarily to fix for that level of distortion within Capture One. You can in your lens corrections here. Actually, let's turn on some diffraction correction, that might help. But go to our distortion and we can pull it. But that's the most Capture One's going to allow you to do natively. If I wanted to really push it, I've got a pincushion version of the profile. So this is the correct profile for this lens, but there is also a generic pincushion one within Capture One. Don't forget that that's there. Because if we are struggling, I can sort of go to there. I don't like it, but you see how that's made the middle part more, where's a word, bulbous. It's made the middle part more bulbous, but it's effectively evened up these windows from the inside to the outside of the frame. We can then go into our keystone. In fact, we could do an auto keystone, just see what that does. We can then go into our crop, and we can make our crop different to do it. And if I look at the improvements that brings, so forget the crop realistically, but this building looks less distorted. This looks more correct in terms of the pull of the building. It feels a little less stretched, but it's not perfect. And it's one of the issues that you're going to have, and just bear this in mind, when you're shooting architecture, especially architecture which is coming towards you at an edge, with an ultra wide lens, or you've got to be ready for some fixing. And it's probably not in your raw editor, it's probably at a pixel level, or it's with one of the tools like Viewpoint. I wouldn't suggest trying this without planning on spending quite a bit of time on it. You're not going to fix this window distortion in Capture One. You're not going to fix this building distortion in Capture One. You're not going to change the fact that these cranes look absurdly out of proportion. I know they're big, but so just be careful when it comes to keystoning. Can fix a certain amount, but it cannot fix everything. It can't fix columns that are not level all the way up. But more importantly, it can't fix for ultra wide lenses. It's just never going to be able to have enough power behind it to do it. And if it did, you'd end up with an image that's so stretched. Obviously, you've got the ability to, well, where are we in here? Use our aspect, just like before. We can still pull this out. We can do all that stuff, but you're so far away, honestly, from the image that you probably had in mind when it was taken, that I'm not sure it's worth it. You would have been better off, genuinely, with architecture. Get further away, longer lens, everything starts to become more proportional. That's it. Keith, when you know the composition will require significant keystoning in post, how much wider would you go to allow for the keystone crop? I would add, honestly, about 25% on, maybe even more, maybe a third, just to give you enough for that turn. If I'm shooting something that I know has perspective distortion, I've probably got 15 to 20% on each side, really, just in case I need to do a big triangle keystone correction. Or, like I just said with Georg's shot, step back, use a longer lens. This shot, if it was stepped further back and using a 20mm lens, would not have the same amount of distortion, so you don't have to lose as much. And that's the thing, you're shooting on an ultra wide lens. Let's take Georg's actual crop. You're shooting on an ultra wide lens, and then you're cutting away half of it. You're throwing it away. There was no point. You'd have been better off being further back, shooting on a tighter lens. So there we go. Keystoning, quick lesson. This one, be more deliberate. If you're going to use a foreground object, tilt shift lens, kind of fun. Use a tilt lens. You can get the whole lot in focus. That's nice. Or be more deliberate about what you're trying to show me is the lead up in the foreground. Don't get too head up with columns trying to get them completely straight, because sometimes they are not. It's that simple. And on this one, nature wins, Robert, on it. And I just, on all of the adjustments that you had, just back them away a little bit, and you'll find actually that this just feels a lot more natural as a result of that pulling away. Paul, question, if you did a pano stitch, would that have helped? Yes, it would, because on a pano stitch you would have used a long, again, it comes back to the lens bit and compression. You'd use a longer lens and done several of them to join them together, and you get less of an impact of the distortion. It's a good question. So that's us for today. Back next week, as always, Tuesday. Send in your stuff via there. Like I said, paulreefilive.wetransfer.com. Between now and next week, you've got access to all of those masterclasses if you choose. The link is down below. You've also got access to that Facebook group that I mentioned. Again, that link is below. Between now and then, send your stuff in, discuss, enter this month's competition. Don't forget, you get to win absolutely nothing. Big prizes. But between now and then, look after yourselves, and we'll see you then. Bye.